Marcus Thiel filed his last backcountry incident report on January 28, 2019. He was 14 years into his career with Colorado Parks and Wildlife. 14 years of winter patrols, wildlife surveys, poaching investigations, and search and rescue coordination across some of the most remote terrain in the San Juan Mountains. His supervisor described him, on record, as methodical, precise, the kind of ranger who double-checked GPS coordinates before submitting anything, the kind who never missed a filing deadline. He stopped filing on January 28th, not because he was suspended, not because he transferred to a desk position. He continued showing up. He continued drawing a salary. He simply stopped documenting what he was finding in a specific corridor of backcountry terrain in La Plata County, Colorado. When his supervisor asked about the gap, Thiel said the area had nothing to report. No wildlife activity, no human encroachment, nothing. His supervisor found that answer unusual. That corridor had always produced data: mule deer, elk movement, the occasional black bear track, even in early winter. It was productive terrain. Silence from that zone was its own kind of anomaly. When pressed, Thiel repeated himself: nothing to report. His supervisor did not push further. 14 years of clean documentation carries institutional weight. The supervisor made a note. He did not escalate. That note still exists. On February 3, 2019, Marcus Thiel drove directly from that corridor to the Southern Ute Indian Tribal Administrative Office in Ignacio, Colorado. He did not stop for fuel. He did not radio his position. He arrived without an appointment and asked to speak with whoever handled traditional land use consultation. He sat in that office for 2 hours and 17 minutes. No official record exists of what was discussed. When he left, he drove home, called his supervisor, and requested immediate reassignment off all backcountry patrol duties.
His request was granted within 48 hours. He has not returned to La Plata County backcountry since. This is not a story about what Marcus Thiel believes. It is a story about what he documented, what he refused to document, and what the physical evidence from that corridor still suggests about something that was moving through that terrain in the winter of 2019. Something that a 14-year veteran ranger considered significant enough to end a career he was good at. Something that the Southern Ute people had already named, had already mapped, had already built a set of behavioral protocols around, protocols passed down through specific family lines over generations of direct encounter. We start with the geography, because the geography is not incidental. It is the reason this happened where it happened and not somewhere else. The San Juan Mountains in southwestern Colorado represent one of the highest and most geographically isolated mountain ranges in the continental United States. La Plata County sits on the eastern margin of that range. The county contains terrain that reaches above 13,000 feet and drops into river valleys below 7,000 feet within the span of a few miles. Winter in the high corridors is severe in ways that compound. Wind patterns are consistent and strong. Snowfall accumulates to depths that make travel without snowshoes or skis functionally impossible above 9,500 feet. Most of the backcountry in this zone sees fewer than a dozen human visitors between November and April. The ones who do enter are people who know exactly what they are doing: rangers, experienced hunters, search and rescue teams. Thiel was in that category. He had trained for high-altitude winter patrol. He carried emergency equipment that could sustain him for 3 days in the field if something went wrong. He did not scare easily, and he did not file reports speculatively. What he put in his logs was what he observed.
That discipline is part of what makes the silence after January 28th significant. The western boundary of his patrol sector did not align cleanly with county lines. It overlapped in 2 specific areas, with land held in federal trust for the Southern Ute Indian Tribe. The Southern Ute Reservation covers roughly 680,000 acres in the Four Corners region. The tribal government exercises jurisdiction over natural resources on trust land and maintains its own conservation and land management infrastructure. The boundary between state-managed land and tribal trust land in Thiel's patrol zone was marked by a combination of GPS coordinates and a physical fence line that had deteriorated in several sections from years of winter damage and deferred maintenance. In summer, a hiker could identify the boundary from signage and the fence condition. In winter, under a full snowpack, the line was functionally invisible. You crossed it without knowing. Thiel's patrol logs from January 2019 show 11 separate entries for a corridor he labeled Grid 7 North. The corridor runs from approximately 9,200 feet elevation up to a ridgeline at 10,600 feet. It is roughly 4 miles long and a half-mile wide. The lower portion sits on state land, the upper third approaches and in 2 places crosses into the tribal boundary zone. Thiel had patrolled that corridor for 7 consecutive winters without incident. His logs from previous years show consistent wildlife activity throughout. His entries from January 3rd through January 28th of 2019 are standard. Mule deer sign at the lower bench crossing. Elk trail compression at 2 locations in the upper meadow system. 1 entry noting fresh mountain lion track near a frozen creek crossing at 9,400 feet. Normal winter data from productive terrain. After January 28th, the log goes quiet on Grid 7 North entirely. The snowfall event that set the stage for what followed occurred the night of January 30th into the morning of January 31st.
The National Weather Service station at Durango recorded 11.3 inches of new snow at elevation by 6 a.m. Wind speed at ridge height averaged 4 miles per hour during the overnight, which is low for that terrain. By dawn, the snowpack was fresh, uniformly distributed, and almost completely undisturbed. Tracking conditions, in the professional language of wildlife biologists, were ideal. A mouse crossing 50 feet of open snowfield would leave a readable trail. A mule deer would leave depressions 3 to 4 inches deep. An elk, depending on weight, between 5 and 8 inches. The snow that morning was a record of everything that moved through it. It was also a record of everything that did not. Thiel entered Grid 7 North at 07:22 a.m. on January 31st. He documented what he found in a personal notebook that morning, not in his official log. That notebook was later shared, in partial form, with 2 researchers in 2021, after Thiel was contacted through a mutual professional contact. The relevant entries begin with an observation that reads, in his handwriting, "No deer crossing at lower bench. Check again tomorrow." He had documented deer using that crossing on 9 consecutive patrol entries across 2 seasons. The trail itself, a well-worn compression in the subsnowpack that predated the fresh fall, was present and visible. The deer were simply not using it. He moved upslope. At approximately 9,600 feet, where the terrain opens into a long natural meadow flanked by dense spruce and fir on 3 sides, he stopped. The meadow was untracked. Not lightly tracked, completely untracked. 11 inches of new snow across 400 meters of open ground, and not a single compression from any animal larger than a small rodent at the very margin of the tree line on the eastern edge. He stood at the meadow entrance for several minutes before writing anything. He described the silence as something he noticed in his body before he processed it consciously. No wind, no bird movement, no branch sound.
No distant elk activity. There should have been, at that elevation, in that season, the sounds of animals moving through timber somewhere within earshot. There was nothing. Then he found the compression line. He described it over 3 pages of his notebook. A single linear depression running north-northeast, approximately 40 meters in length before it enters the north tree line. Width uniform at approximately 18 to 20 inches across the full length. Depth uniform at 2 to 2.5 inches from the snow surface. No individual track differentiation within the depression. No stride pattern. No left-right alternation consistent with a walking gait. Continuous and unbroken compression, as if a long, flat surface, not a foot, not a paw, not a hoof, not a ski, had moved through the snow without ever lifting from it, or without ever fully pressing into it. The surface of the depression was smooth. Not smoothed by wind, there was no wind that morning. Smooth the way pressed fabric is smooth, uniform and complete. He photographed it, 31 photographs from multiple angles, including overhead shots taken by standing on a fallen log at the meadow's edge for elevation. He photographed the beginning of the depression near the south tree line, the full midsection across open ground, and the point where it entered the north timber. He did not follow it into the trees. He also noted the temperature differential. His handheld unit read -4 degrees Fahrenheit at the meadow center. He noted that the air in the immediate vicinity of the compression line registered approximately 3 degrees warmer on his unit than the surrounding meadow. Not 3 degrees colder, warmer. He took readings at 6 points along the depression and 6 matching points 3 feet to either side. The differential was consistent at every measurement. Something had been there recently enough that a thermal trace remained in the ambient air above the depression. He wrote, "Heat source moved through here.
Unknown origin, left warmth without leaving weight. He left the meadow without following the compression line into the timber. He drove back to his truck, drove to the patrol station, and said nothing about it to his colleagues. 3 weeks before this morning, on January 10th, Marcus Thiel had a conversation at the boundary fence of Grid 7 North that he did not include in any official documentation. He included it in his personal notebook, dated and timed. Raymond Cuthare was 71 years old at the time of that conversation. He had served for 19 years as a conservation officer for the Southern Ute tribal government before retiring in 2011. During those 19 years, he worked boundary coordination with Colorado Parks and Wildlife on 3 separate occasions that involved Thiel's patrol sector. He knew the terrain on both sides of that fence better than most people know their own neighborhoods. He knew where the elk moved in January, where the deer sheltered in February, and where neither animal would go regardless of season. Thiel described him in his notebook as a man who only said what was necessary. Not unfriendly, just economical. On January 10th, Cuthare appeared at the fence line while Thiel was conducting a trail camera check at a known elk corridor. Thiel had not called him. There was no scheduled meeting. Cuthare simply arrived, as if he had expected to find Thiel there. He did not explain his presence. He looked at Thiel and said, "Don't go above 10,400 feet after the second snowfall of January. And if you find ground with no animal sound, don't measure it, don't document it. Leave immediately." Thiel asked what he meant by the second snowfall specifically. Cuthare said the timing mattered. He said, "The first snow pushes them down. The second snow is when the other thing comes back up." He did not explain who or what he meant by the other thing. Thiel asked if he was describing a specific animal.
Cuthare looked at him for a moment and then said, "You'll know the ground when you find it." Then he turned and walked back into the timber on the tribal side of the fence. Thiel wrote the exchange down in full and noted that he filed it mentally as significant but unactionable. He did not change his patrol schedule. He continued into Grid 7 North. He found the ground Cuthare had described, silent, untracked, wrong in a way he couldn't categorize, on January 31st. And instead of leaving, he returned. He returned on February 1st and February 2nd. His notebook entries for both days described the same meadow, same absence of wildlife, same maintained and complete silence. On February 2nd, he noted fresh compression, same width, same depth, same smooth interior surface, but now running in the opposite direction, south-southwest, retracing the approximate path of the January 31st depression, but not exactly, offset by about 8 feet to the east. Something had moved back through the meadow during the night between his visits. And again, no individual tracks, no stride, just the line. On the morning of February 3rd, he brought a handheld thermal imaging unit. It was standard department-issued equipment, used primarily for mountain lion and bear monitoring during nocturnal survey work. He had operated it for 6 years and understood its capabilities and its limits. He entered the meadow at 06:09 a.m. Ambient temperature was -9 Fahrenheit. First light was beginning to define the ridgeline to the east, but the meadow itself was still in full pre-dawn shadow. He positioned himself at the south meadow entrance, the same position he had used on both previous mornings. He activated the thermal unit and began a slow scan of the north tree line. At 06:14 a.m., the unit registered a signature. Thiel spent 4 pages of his notebook on what he observed during the next 40 seconds. The signature was at the north tree margin, approximately 200 meters from his position, upright. The thermal profile displayed a tall, narrow, vertical form. He estimated the height against the known dimensions of the spruce trees behind it, trees he had stood next to on a previous patrol and noted as approximately 40 feet tall. Against that reference, he placed the form between 8 and 9.5 feet in vertical extent. The thermal color on his unit's display, the unit uses a color gradient from blue through yellow to white to indicate increasing heat, showed the form in the high yellow to white range, not the orange yellow of a large mammal in cold air. White, the hottest point on the scale. He wrote, "Heat output inconsistent with estimated mass. A form that size, in these temperatures, should read orange at best. This is reading like a heat source, not like a warm-blooded animal losing heat to ambient air. It is producing, not radiating." The form was moving when he first acquired it, slowly, north to south along the tree margin. A lateral drift, no apparent stride, similar to the linear movement pattern of the compression lines he had been documenting. Then it stopped, a pause of several seconds. Then the upper portion of the form rotated toward his position. He did not move. He did not activate his radio. He held the thermal unit steady and watched. He wrote, "Subject appears aware of my position. The body orientation has not changed. The form is still facing north, but the upper section, which I am reading as the head or a head equivalent structure, has turned toward me. I am 200 meters away. I am downwind. I have made no sound. I have not activated any external light source. My thermal signature is present and readable to any heat-sensitive observer, but I am behind tree cover at the meadow entrance. I do not know the mechanism by which it is aware of me. It is aware." He held position for 40 seconds. Then he directed the unit toward the ground beneath the thermal signature. The snow at the base of the form showed no compression response.
At 200 meters in pre-dawn conditions, the resolution of a handheld unit is limited but functional for large mass objects. He had detected mountain lion tracks at 150 meters with this unit in comparable conditions. A bear's depression in snow produces a readable thermal contrast from body heat conducted through the snowpack. He knew what he was looking for. He looked. The snow beneath the form showed no melt differential, no compression shadow, no trace of conducted heat into the surface below, where an 8-foot, apparently very warm, apparently very heavy form was standing. Nothing below it registered. He photographed the unit's display screen with his cell phone. He sent the image, along with 3 of his ground-level compression photographs, to a colleague, a wildlife biologist at Colorado State University, with whom he had exchanged data on 3 previous research projects. He sent the images at 7:03 a.m. from the trailhead parking area. The colleague confirmed receipt that morning. He sent a single reply. "Where is this?" Thiel responded with the general area. The colleague did not respond further. When a researcher contacted this individual in 2021 and referenced the images, the colleague said he had no recollection of receiving any photographs from Thiel in February 2019. He declined to discuss the matter further and ended the call. The thermal image exists on Thiel's device. The compression photographs exist. They have been reviewed by one researcher, who described the thermal image as showing a luminous vertical form with no detectable ground contact thermal signature. He said that the absence of ground contact return was the detail he could not explain with available equipment failure modes. Thermal units malfunction in cold temperatures, but they fail in specific, documentable ways. They do not selectively eliminate ground return while accurately rendering an overhead form. The image does not show that kind of failure. It shows what Thiel described seeing.
The Southern Ute hunters who spoke to researchers in 2021 were identified through a tribal member with academic connections who agreed to facilitate introductions. The 2 men were not interviewed together. They lived in different parts of the reservation. Their accounts were collected separately, 6 weeks apart. The researcher did not share the content of the first interview before conducting the second. Both men described the same set of behavioral prohibitions. Neither man framed them as legend. They were explicit about the distinction. These were not stories passed around community fires. They were operational protocols, specific to certain terrain zones, transmitted within family lineages that had experienced direct encounter. Their grandfathers had passed these rules to their fathers with the same matter-of-fact instruction that you pass down any practical knowledge: how to read a weather change, how to dress an elk, how to behave when you find certain ground. The first rule: do not whistle above tree line after dark. Both men described this the same way: not singing, not calling out, whistling specifically. One man said that a whistle at that pitch, in that terrain, after dark, produces a response, not an echo, something directional and deliberate. He had heard it once as a teenager, when his uncle had whistled to signal a position change during a hunt at elevation. What came back was not his uncle's whistle. It came from the wrong direction and the wrong distance, and it came too fast. The second rule: do not track wounded game above a specific elevation after fresh snow. If an animal bleeds into the snowpack at height, leave it. Don't follow the blood trail. Don't attempt to recover the animal. The blood draws attention from something that is already moving through that terrain. One man said his father had lost a bull elk this way, wounded it at 9,800 feet in October, watched it go up the ridge, and his father's father had stopped him from following. The elk was never recovered. The following morning, the blood trail was gone. Not covered by snow, gone. The snow around it was undisturbed. The third rule: do not direct focused attention at anything stationary that is not producing sound. If something registers in your peripheral awareness, a shape, a form, a presence at the tree line, do not turn to face it. Do not attempt to examine it. Move away, slowly, without confirming what you have noticed. One of the men said, "Direct attention is an invitation, not a metaphor, a functional description of how it responds to being observed." He said it the way an electrician describes what happens when you bridge a circuit. Cause and effect, observable, repeatable, documented across generations of people who knew what they were dealing with. When the researcher asked where these rules originated, the second man said, "From the people who came back. The ones who didn't follow the rules didn't always come back. The ones who came back made the rules." Thiel, by the morning of February 3rd, had violated at least 2 of them. He had maintained direct, focused attention on the form for 40 seconds through a targeting instrument, and on his previous 3 visits, he had comprehensively documented and measured the compression lines, sustained, systematic observation of something that both Southern Ute sources indicated should not be observed directly. Whether that violation was causally connected to what happened next is not something that any investigative framework currently in existence can determine. What can be determined is the GPS data. After the thermal observation ended, Thiel lowered the unit. The form was no longer visible at the north tree line. He had not seen it leave. It was simply no longer producing a return on the display. He began descending the ridgeline at approximately 06:17 a.m. using his standard exit route, a series of switchbacks through dense timber that drops from the ridgeline to the lower meadow system, then follows a creek drainage to the trailhead parking area. He had walked this route dozens of times. In conditions similar to that morning, it took him between 28 and 34 minutes. His GPS log records his position leaving the ridgeline at 06:19 a.m. It records his position at 06:21 a.m., approximately 300 meters into the descent, consistent with his normal pace. At 06:22 a.m., positional data stops. The unit was powered on. Its internal diagnostic log shows continuous operation, ambient temperature readings, battery status updates, motion sensor data throughout the entire period. The unit was functioning. Positional data simply does not appear in the log between 06:22 a.m. and 06:28 a.m. 6 minutes. When the GPS log resumes, Thiel's position is registered at the trailhead parking area at his vehicle. The distance from his last recorded position to the trailhead is 1.4 miles on his exit route. In fresh snow, at elevation, carrying equipment, that distance requires a minimum of 22 minutes at a brisk pace. He covered it, according to the log, in the 6 minutes during which his position was not being recorded. His department radio logged an open channel broadcast from his unit number during the same gap. 4 minutes and 11 seconds of open channel static. No voice component, no identifiable signal pattern. Static from a functioning radio on a clear frequency. The communication center logged it as an equipment anomaly under the category of environmental radio interference. They did not flag it as an incident. They did not contact Thiel to ask about it. Standard procedure for an isolated static event during a routine patrol shift is to log it and move on. They logged it and moved on. The engine of his patrol vehicle was running when Thiel became aware of himself sitting in the driver's seat. He has no memory of reaching the vehicle. He has no memory of opening the door. He has no memory of starting the engine. He has no memory of the 1.4 miles of terrain between his last conscious moment on the descent and the moment he found himself sitting in a running truck in the parking area. He drove directly to Ignacio, 40 miles. He did not stop. He did not eat. He did not radio his position or inform dispatch of his change in location. He arrived at the Southern Ute Tribal Administrative Office and asked to speak with someone. He sat in that office for 2 hours and 17 minutes. He drove home. He called his supervisor and said he needed off backcountry patrol immediately and permanently. He gave no specific reason that his supervisor retained in writing beyond general health concerns. The FOIA request for all incident reports filed by Thiel's unit in February 2019 returned 0 entries for February 3rd. His patrol logs from February 4th through his reassignment show him working lower elevation road patrol in a completely different district. The radio log anomaly from February 3rd is accessible as a standalone document and contains no linking reference to an incident report because no incident report was filed to link it to. The GPS log anomaly was never reviewed because no one knew to request it until the researchers pulled it in 2021. These documents do not individually prove anything. Together, they form a specific shape. A ranger with a clean 14-year record goes silent about a specific zone.
He violates, apparently unknowingly, behavioral protocols that a separate indigenous knowledge system had identified as dangerous across generations of encounter. He documents a thermal signature with characteristics that the equipment should not have been able to produce.
He experiences a 6-minute gap in his position log that the GPS unit internally confirms it was running for. He emerges at his vehicle with no account of the intervening time or distance. He drives without stopping to the tribal office of the people who already had a name for what he encountered. He never goes back. Raymond Cuthair was asked about the corridor directly in the spring of 2022. He agreed to a brief conversation. He was asked if the Southern Ute had a name for Grid 7 North, for that specific terrain. He said yes. He said the name translates, approximately, as where weight doesn't belong to the thing carrying it. The researcher asked him to explain the name. He said, "Some things move through this world without being of it the way you and I are of it. They occupy space, they generate heat, they are aware, but they don't leave the evidence of physical presence that you and I leave. No compression, no track, no displacement. That is what the name describes. We named it because we kept finding the same condition in the same places. The name came from the observation." He was asked how long the Southern Ute had known about this ground. He said, "Longer than anyone's grandfather can remember. Long enough that the rules around it are old enough that no one who made them is alive. The rules survived because following them meant surviving. Not following them meant something else." He was asked what that something else was. He looked at the researcher and said, "The 6-minute gap you're asking me about is not the first time someone has had that experience in that terrain. It is the first time a non-tribal person documented it. Our people documented it differently and earlier. The documentation is in the rules we still follow." He declined to say anything further. The conversation ended. Marcus Thiel lives and works in Montrose, Colorado. He has not granted interviews. He has not published any account.
A mutual contact conveyed a single statement attributed to him. "I documented what the equipment could document. What happened in those 6 minutes is outside what any equipment I had could document. I'm not going to describe something I can't support. What I can support is already in the logs, if you know which logs to look at. The corridor is not closed. There is no signage. The fence line remains deteriorated in the sections near the upper boundary. A person with the right gear and the knowledge to navigate to 10,600 feet in January can reach that meadow. The second snowfall of January 2026 came the night of the 19th. 11 inches were recorded at elevation near the La Plata County backcountry boundary. No one filed an incident report from Grid 7 North following that storm. That absence may mean nothing, or it may mean that whoever went up there followed the rules Raymond Cuthair described. Didn't measure, didn't document, left. The thermal image exists. The compression lines were photographed 31 times. The GPS gap is in an archived log in a state database. The radio static event is in the Communication Center archive. The name the Southern Ute gave to that ground is older than any of it, and more precise than any of it. None of these documents were created to support a conclusion. They were created by instruments and institutions that had no reason to fabricate anything. They simply recorded what was measurable in the moment and filed it where records go when no one flags them as important, where weight doesn't belong to the thing carrying it. That is what moves through the high timber of La Plata County after the second snow. It leaves warmth without leaving mass. It registers on instruments without registering on surfaces. It was moving through that meadow before Thiel's department existed, before Colorado was a state, before the fence line that separates state land from tribal trust land was ever installed. The Southern Ute knew it then.
They built protocols around it that 14 years of professional ranger training gave Thiel no framework to recognize until he was already inside the situation those protocols were designed to prevent. He was aware of the rules 3 weeks before February 3rd. He did not follow them. The ground is still there. It is still accessible. The second snowfall still comes every January. And whatever has been crossing that meadow since before Raymond Cuthair's grandfather's grandfather gave it a name has not been relocated, reclassified, contained, or removed. It has only ever been survived by the people who already understood what they were dealing with and made the decision, before curiosity overrode judgment, not to look directly at it, not to measure it, not to document it, not to go back. Thiel learned that order of operations in reverse. He has not said what those 6 minutes cost him. He has not gone back. That silence is its own kind of answer.